The grand chamber of the Cathar Dominion was a monument to silence and intimidation. Its walls were hewn from the polished heart of a collapsed star, a material so dense it warped light, causing the star charts projected upon its surface to ripple as if viewed through deep water. The air itself was heavy, ancient, and charged with the faint scent of ozone from the silent energy conduits that pulsed with the lifeblood of an empire spanning 1,000 suns. Upon the obsidian dais sat the High Council, beings whose lineage was measured in conquests and whose authority was absolute. Their carapaces, a mixture of biological growth and ceremonial armor, shimmered with captured starlight, each member a living testament to the Dominion's unyielding creed: power manifest, power absolute. Below them, in the sunken amphitheater, stood the scions of the great fleets, commanders whose shadows had fallen across entire civilizations before extinguishing their light. Today, however, the silence was not one of reverence, but of a deeply unsettling uncertainty. At the heart of the chamber, a vast holographic projection shimmered, its image an affront to every principle the Dominion held sacred. It was a fleet, but it was a fleet of such insignificant size that it barely registered as a coherent military force. The ships were sleek, unadorned, and possessed a stark, almost sterile geometry that lacked any of the glorious, predatory aesthetic of a Cathar warship. They were few, so few that a junior patrol squadron would be considered an overwhelming response. Yet this tiny armada had trespassed upon the edge of Dominion space, in the strategically vital Coriolis sector, and had simply stopped. High Lord Vorlag, his ancient carapace etched with the scars of 100 campaigns, watched the hologram with an unnerving stillness. His multifaceted eyes, usually alight with strategic fire, were dark pools of contemplation. He felt a disquiet that he could not name, a subtle dissonance in the fabric of the expected. They had faced down the machine intelligences of the Cygnus Rift, shattered the crystalline armadas of the Seldorians, and burned the hive fleets of the Void Swarm. All had been vast, terrible, and possessed of a power that demanded respect even as it was being annihilated. This was different. This was an anomaly, a whisper where there should have been a roar. It was this whisper that chilled him more than any battle cry ever had. Across the dais, Scion Kalen, his own armor ostentatiously polished and unscarred, let a low rumble of amusement escape his vocalizer. It was a sound that echoed the thoughts of many in the chamber, a sound of derision and contemptuous pride, the sound of laughter. "They call themselves humans," Kalen's voice boomed, imbued with the arrogant resonance of his high station. He gestured a clawed appendage toward the hologram, a gesture of casual dismissal. A bipedal species from a solitary star system, barely a breath of time into their interstellar journey. Their archives, what little we could glean from the galactic common net, speak of internal conflicts, of a primitive reliance on kinetic weaponry in their recent past. And this is the entirety of their exploratory might. This is their grand fleet. The laughter in the chamber grew, a chorus of deep, grating sounds that spoke of a collective, unshakable confidence in their own supremacy. It is not even a scouting party. It is an insult, a collection of courier ships and survey vessels daring to pollute our sovereign borders with their pathetic presence. Vorlag did not join the laughter. His gaze remained fixed on the human ships. There was a discipline to their formation that was unsettling. Not the rigid, aggressive geometry of a Cathar battle line, but a fluid, almost organic pattern, like a constellation that had achieved a perfect, silent harmony. The sensor readings, which he had studied for countless cycles, were even more disturbing. The energy signatures were impossibly clean. Cathar ships, for all their might, bled power into the void, their reactors roaring with contained fury. The human ships were silent. They emitted almost nothing, their power cores shielded with a technology that bordered on the theoretical. They were ghosts in the spectrum, visible only to the most sensitive gravimetric and dimensional scanners. They were either primitives who had stumbled into the void with failing systems, or they were something else entirely. Something that understood the art of not being seen, not being heard, not being known. "Your amusement is premature, Scion Kalen," Vorlag's voice cut through the fading laughter, each word as sharp and cold as obsidian. The chamber fell silent once more, the weight of the High Lord's disapproval pressing down upon them. "You see a tiny army and laugh at its weakness. I see a deliberate statement. A force of this size, positioned with such precision at the nexus of 3 major. Hyperlanes is not an act of ignorance. It is an act of supreme confidence." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the assembled commanders, challenging their comfortable assumptions. "The Void Swarm was numberless, yet we broke them upon the anvil of our strategy. The Cygnian machines were a legion of steel, yet we melted their logic with the heat of our fury. We have always faced foes who presented their strength like a banner. What if these humans do not measure strength in the same way? What if their power is not in the size of their fleet, but in the nature of their soldiers? Kalen sneered, a subtle shift in his posture betraying his disdain. Soldiers? What soldiers? We have no data on their ground forces, their biological capabilities. They are soft-fleshed, resource-poor, and confined to a single world of origin. Their history is one of self-destruction. They are a fractured, emotionally unstable species. To even consider them a strategic variable is a waste of this council's time. Send the Crimson Blade fleet. Let Lord Admiral Jackrall deliver our ultimatum. They will flee or they will be dust. The outcome is the same. The Dominion's border will be cleansed. The sentiment was echoed by murmurs of agreement. It was the Cathar way. A challenge was met with overwhelming, decisive force. A border was not a suggestion. It was a wall of fire, and any who touched it were burned. It was a simple, brutal, and eternally effective philosophy that had carved them an empire from the chaos of the galaxy. Vorlag slowly rose from his seat on the dais, his immense frame commanding absolute attention. The star charts on the walls seemed to bend around him, as if acknowledging a greater gravity. Lord Admiral Jackrall is a fine instrument, Scion Kalen, but an instrument is only as effective as the hand that wields it, and a hand that strikes in ignorance risks shattering itself against an unknown substance. He turned his gaze back to the hologram, to the serene, silent fleet hanging in the void. We know nothing of their weapons. We know nothing of their defenses. Our long-range scans show no evidence of traditional shielding, no plasma conduits, no kinetic barriers. The space around their hulls is placid as undisturbed deep space. That is not primitive, that is impossible. His words hung in the air, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of arrogance. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a tense, analytical silence. The Scions and Lord Admirals began to look at the tiny fleet not as an insult, but as a problem, an equation without a solution. The smallness of the fleet was no longer a sign of weakness. It was a variable in an unknown formula. Why send so few? Why remain so silent? Why reveal nothing, betray nothing, ask for nothing? The Cathar understood declarations of war, ultimatums, and petitions for mercy. They did not understand silence. It was a language of the void, of dead things and ancient, sleeping terrors. Vorlag felt a cold certainty coalesce within him. They were not dealing with primitives who had wandered into their yard. They were dealing with something that had deliberately and silently placed itself in their path, waiting for a reaction. And he feared, with a depth of dread he had not felt since his first command, that the reaction his council so eagerly wished to provide was precisely the one the humans were expecting. The command deck of the Cathar dreadnought Indomitable Will was a cathedral of conquest. Its primary viewscreen was a vast expanse of armored crystal, giving Lord Admiral Jackrall a god's-eye view of the cosmos and the overwhelming force he commanded. His fleet, the Crimson Blade, was a tide of jagged, crimson-hulled warships that filled the void, their weapon emplacements glowing with hungry, contained energy. They had translated from hyperspace in a textbook display of overwhelming power, arranging themselves in a crescent formation that enveloped the tiny human fleet. The sheer disparity was breathtaking. It was a leviathan preparing to swallow a minnow. Jackrall stood upon his command throne, his claws gripping the armrests, a sense of profound, righteous satisfaction coursing through him. This was the purpose of the Cathar, to project power, to enforce order, to demonstrate the consequence of trespass. The humans had not fled at their arrival. They simply remained, their silent, disciplined formation holding steady as if in the presence of an equal. It was an act of folly so supreme, Jackrall found it almost pitiable. "Open a channel," he commanded, his voice a low growl that resonated through the deck plates. "Broadcast on all frequencies, standard Dominion ultimatum, no deviations." His communications officer, a younger Cathar whose carapace still held the sheen of recent ascension, worked his console. A moment later, a connection was established. The main viewscreen shimmered and a new image appeared, supplanting the starfield. It was the interior of a human ship's bridge. The sight was an immediate disappointment. It was not the glorious, intimidating war room of a Dominion vessel. It was a sterile, utilitarian space, bathed in soft, white light. There were no honor banners, no trophies of conquest, only clean, seamless consoles and holographic displays showing serene, flowing data. And in the center of the image stood a single human figure, a female. She was not what Jackrall had expected. There was no ornate uniform, no visible weaponry, no symbols of rank or power. She wore a simple, dark blue garment that seemed more suited for a technician than a fleet commander. Her face was pale, her features symmetrical, and to his eyes, disturbingly soft. Her hair was dark and pulled back from her face, but it was her eyes that held his attention. They were a deep, calm brown, and they met his gaze through the view screen without a flicker of fear or aggression or even surprise. They held only a quiet, unnerving attentiveness. "I am Lord Admiral Jackrall of the Cathar Dominion's Crimson Blade," he announced, his voice amplified and broadcast across the void, a declaration of doom. "You are in violation of sovereign Dominion territory. You are to surrender your vessels for impoundment and your crews for interrogation. Refusal will result in your immediate and total annihilation. You have 1 cycle to comply." The human female inclined her head slightly, a gesture so subtle it was almost missed. Her expression did not change. Her voice, when it came, was clear and devoid of any discernible emotion. It was not the voice of a supplicant or a warrior. It was the voice of a scholar stating a fact. "This is Captain Eva Rostova of the Terran exploration vessel Vigilance. According to the Consolidated Galactic Concordance star charts, this sector is designated as unclaimed exploratory space. We have broadcasted no hostile signals and have made no aggressive maneuvers. By all established interstellar protocols, we are lawfully present." The sheer audacity of her statement struck Jackrall with physical force. She was quoting law to him, to the Cathar. It was like a microbe lecturing a star on the principles of gravity. A low, dangerous rumble began in Jackrall's chest. "Your protocols and concordances are the meaningless scribbles of lesser races. The Dominion writes its law in plasma and fire. This space is ours because we declare it so. Your presence here is an act of aggression. Your silence was an act of stealth. Do not compound your errors with this debate." He leaned forward, his immense form filling the command throne. "Your tiny army is surrounded. Your technology is insignificant. Your position is hopeless. Surrender." He spat the last word, infusing it with all the contempt he felt for this frail, soft-spoken creature and her pathetic fleet. He expected a response of fear, a plea for negotiation, perhaps even a desperate, futile attack. He did not expect what came next. Captain Rostova's gaze remained steady. "The designation of our fleet as an army is a misinterpretation of its function. The size of our contingent is not a reflection of our military capacity, but a deliberate choice based on our mission parameters. It is an expression of efficiency, not weakness." She paused, and for the first time a subtle shift occurred in her expression, a shadow of something that might have been regret, or perhaps merely disappointment. "We have no desire for conflict. Our purpose here is observation and data collection. However, your ultimatum is predicated on a false premise, that you have the capacity to enforce it. That is an error in your strategic analysis." The bridge of the Indomitable will fell into a stunned silence. Jackrall felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. This was no longer just a trespass. It was a direct challenge to his honor, to the very foundation of the Dominion's power. He had offered them the mercy of a swift surrender, and they had replied with a lecture on his own strategic failings. "You are fools," he snarled, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You have sealed your own fate." He turned to his weapons officer. "Target the lead human vessel. Fire a warning shot. A single lance of pure plasma. Let them witness a taste of the power they have so arrogantly dismissed. Let them see the light of a small star being born, and then let them reconsider their position." The weapons officer, his claws flying across his console, complied instantly. A massive energy spike was detected from the Indomitable Will's primary weapon array. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the calm flow of data on the holographic displays did not change. The technicians and scientists at their stations did not flinch. Captain Rostova did not even look away from the view screen. She simply said, in that same unnervingly calm voice, "We would advise against that, Lord Admiral." Her words were not a plea. They were a final, dispassionate statement of fact. Across the void, a torrent of incandescent energy, a spear of sunfire capable of boiling the oceans of a planet, erupted from the Cathar dreadnought. It crossed the distance between the fleets in an instant, a blinding line of pure destruction aimed directly at the Vigilance. And then the impossible happened. The human ship did not explode. It did not raise shields. It did not evade. The space in front of the ship, a perfect spherical volume no larger than the vessel itself, simply warped. It did not shimmer or glow. It became, for a fraction of a second, a patch of absolute blackness, a hole in reality that drank the light of stars. The plasma lance, an unstoppable force of nature, struck this point of non-existence and vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed. It was gone. It had ceased to be, its energy unmade, its very existence erased from the space-time continuum. The silence on the bridge of the Indomitable Will was absolute, profound, and terrifying. The only sound was the faint hum of the life support systems, a sound that suddenly seemed fragile and inadequate. The weapons officer stared at his console, his mandibles agape, rereading sensor data that made no sense. The energy had simply been deleted from the universe. Jackrall felt a coldness spread through his body that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the bridge. It was the coldness of primal fear, the kind his species had not felt for millennia. It was the fear of the unknown, of a power that did not obey the known laws of physics. He looked at the view screen, at the human captain's unchanging, placid face. Her eyes held no triumph, no arrogance. They held only a deep, abiding calm, the calm of a being who had known the outcome of this exchange before it had even begun. The Cathar had laughed at the tiny army. Now, in the face of a single, silent act of impossible defense, no one was laughing. The universe had suddenly become a much larger and more frightening place, and Lord Admiral Jackrall had the sickening feeling that his entire civilization had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. High Lord Vorlag stood alone in the Chamber of Echoes, a private meditation space deep within the obsidian spire. The walls here were not polished but left raw, their crystalline structures absorbing all light and sound, creating a perfect, impenetrable silence. Here, a Cathar could face his own thoughts without the distractions of empire. On a simple stone dais in the center of the room, a single holographic projector displayed the combat logs from the Coriolis sector. Vorlag watched the recording for the 10th time, his ancient mind dissecting every microsecond of the engagement. He saw the Indomitable will fire its main cannon, a glorious and terrible display of Dominion power. And he saw the lance of pure energy vanish into a pocket of absolute nothingness. He saw the impossible defense, but he was looking for something else. He was looking at the aftermath. After the failed attack, Lord Admiral Jackrall, his arrogance shattered, had held his fire. The human fleet, in turn, had not capitalized on his hesitation. They did not return fire. They did not advance. They did not issue threats or demands. They simply waited, their formation holding, their energy signatures remaining flat and silent. This, to Vorlag, was more terrifying than any weapon. An enemy who possessed the power to unmake energy itself and chose not to use it in retaliation was an enemy whose motivations were utterly alien to the Cathar psyche. The Dominion was built on the principle of overwhelming response. An attack was met with annihilation. A threat was met with a preemptive strike. It was a philosophy of total, uncompromising warfare. The humans had been fired upon by a weapon that could crack a continent, and their response was nothing, just a silent, patient waiting. It was the patience of a mountain waiting for a storm to pass. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, announcing a visitor. Only one being in the Dominion would dare to disturb him here. "Enter," Vorlag commanded, his voice a low rumble. The great stone door slid aside, and Lord Admiral Jackrall entered, his crimson armor looking somehow dull and tarnished in the lightless room. He did not carry himself with the proud bearing of a fleet commander, but with the heavy, stooped posture of a shamed warrior. He knelt before Vorlag, a gesture of profound submission. "High Lord," Jackrall began, his voice strained. "I have failed, my report has been filed, I await my sentence." Vorlag gestured for him to rise. "You did not fail, Jackrall, you acted according to our doctrines. You encountered a force that operates outside our understanding of reality. Your report was illuminating. It has saved us from a much greater folly." He turned his attention back to the hologram, which now showed a magnified image of the human ship, the Vigilance. "Cyan Kalen and his faction are calling for the deployment of the Grand Armada. They believe that what cannot be understood must be destroyed with overwhelming numbers. They believe 1,000 lances will succeed where one has failed." Jackrall shuddered, the memory of that vanishing lance of energy still fresh in his consciousness. "High Lord, 1,000 lances would meet the same fate, or 1,000,000. We were not facing a shield. It was not technology as we comprehend it. It was a negation. They did not block the attack. They removed it from existence." He looked at Vorlag, his multifaceted eyes filled with a new, terrifying respect for their silent adversaries. "Their captain, she spoke to me. She was not a warrior. She was a scholar. She spoke of our actions as a strategic error, not an act of war, but a mistake in logic, as if we were a student who had answered a question incorrectly." Vorlag let a slow, heavy sigh escape him, a sound like grinding stone. "That is precisely what I have feared. We have built an empire on the assumption that might is the ultimate arbiter of truth. We have never encountered a species that treats warfare as a problem of physics rather than a contest of will." He deactivated the hologram, plunging the room into near-total darkness, save for the faint glow from the corridor. "The humans have accepted our request for a diplomatic envoy. They did so without hesitation. They have invited us aboard their vessel. This news surprised Jackrall. After we fired upon them, it is a trap. Is it? Vorlag countered, his voice a soft, dangerous whisper in the dark. A trap implies a desire to harm or capture. What if they desire something else entirely? What if they desire to teach? He began to pace the chamber, his heavy footfalls the only sound. We have laughed at their tiny army. We have mocked their frail appearance. We have dismissed them as primitives. We have done everything in our power to provoke a conflict, to force them to reveal their strength in a way we could understand, in fire and death. And they have consistently refused to oblige. They have responded to our threats with logic, our force with an esoteric defense, and our aggression with an invitation to talk. He stopped and faced his Lord Admiral. I will lead the delegation myself. Cyan Kalen believes I am walking into my own execution. I believe I am walking into the most important moment in the history of our Dominion. The shuttle that carried the Cathar delegation was a marvel of Dominion engineering, all sharp angles and armored plating, a miniature warship in its own right. As it approached the human vessel Vigilance, the contrast was stark. The human ship had no visible weapon ports, no intimidating armored prow. Its hull was a smooth, seamless expanse of a pearlescent material that seemed to shift in color with the angle of the light. A section of the hull dilated open, not with the grinding gears of a hangar bay, but with the silent, fluid motion of a living organism, revealing a brightly lit docking chamber. As the Cathar shuttle settled onto the deck, Vorlag felt the ship's internal artificial gravity take hold. It was perfectly stable, without the subtle fluctuations common to even the most advanced Cathar capital ships. The ramp lowered, and High Lord Vorlag stepped out, flanked by a contingent of his personal guard, the elite Obsidian Guard, clad in black armor and armed with ceremonial but fully functional power glaives. The air in the docking bay was clean, cool, and carried a neutral, almost sterile scent. Waiting for them was not a phalanx of soldiers, but a single human. It was the same female from the communication, Captain Eva Rostova. She was flanked by two other humans, both wearing the same simple, functional blue garments. None of them were armed. High Lord Vorlag, she said, her voice the same calm, measured tone from the broadcast. She gave a slight bow of her head, a gesture of respect that was nonetheless devoid of subservience. Welcome aboard the Vigilance. We are honored by your presence. Vorlag studied her up close. She was smaller than he had anticipated, her physical form utterly unimpressive by Cathar standards. She possessed no natural armor, no visible strength. Yet she stood before him, the supreme leader of a galactic empire, with an unnerving, absolute composure. It was the composure of a being who held a power that was not measured in physical might. Your honor is unexpected, Captain Rostova, Vorlag replied, his own voice a deep bass that seemed to be absorbed by the quiet atmosphere of the ship. Given that my fleet attempted to destroy your vessel. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. Your fleet executed a threat display based on your species' ingrained strategic doctrines. An action is not inherently hostile. It is the intent and the underlying logic that define it. Your logic was flawed, but we did not interpret the action as an expression of true malice, merely a lack of data. His response left Vorlag momentarily speechless. She was deconstructing an act of war into a simple academic miscalculation. He and his delegation were escorted from the docking bay into the ship proper. The corridors were as clean and Spartan as the bridge had appeared. There was no art, no decoration, only function. But the ambient energy in the ship was palpable, a low, silent hum that vibrated in the very marrow of Vorlag's bones. It was the hum of immense, contained power, perfectly shielded and efficiently channeled. They passed other humans in the corridors, engineers, scientists, technicians. They all paused to give the same slight, respectful bow, but their eyes held no fear. Only a deep, analytical curiosity. It was deeply unsettling to be viewed not as a conqueror, but as a fascinating, complex specimen. They were led to a conference room. Like the rest of the ship, it was stark and functional. A simple table stood in the center, and the far wall was a transparent screen showing the starfield outside, with the vast, intimidating shapes of the Crimson Blade fleet hanging in the void. It was a subtle but clear reminder of the situation. Captain Rostova gestured for the Cathar to take a seat. Please, she said, we have much to discuss. Vorlag remained standing, his guards forming a silent, menacing perimeter behind him. I have not come to discuss terms of surrender, Captain. Nor did we expect you to, Rostova replied smoothly, taking a seat herself. We invited you here to provide you with the data you lack, to correct your flawed strategic analysis. to explain why your understanding of power is incomplete. A low growl emanated from one of Vorlag's guards, a sound of pure indignation. Ristova's gaze flickered to the guard, and for a fleeting moment her calm expression was replaced by something else. A look of profound, ancient pity. It was a look that made the guard flinch and fall silent. "You speak of our flawed logic," Vorlag said, his voice hard. "You neutralized our most powerful weapon with impossible ease. Explain this technology. What is this shield?" Ristova shook her head. "It is not a shield. A shield is a barrier. It implies a contest of energy, a struggle between two forces. What you witnessed was not a struggle. It was a correction. We did not block your energy lance. We simply folded the dimensional manifold in its path. In layman's terms, we instructed the space in front of your weapon to cease existing for a moment, and then instructed it to exist again once the energy had passed into a pocket dimension from which it will never return. It is not a weapon or a defense. It is applied mathematics." The chamber was silent. Vorlag and his guards stared at her, trying to process the sheer enormity of what she had just said. They had mastered space-time, not just for travel, but as a tactical tool, to fold reality itself as a means of defense. The energy and computational power required for such an act was beyond Cathar comprehension. Their entire understanding of naval warfare was based on the interplay of energy shields and plasma weapons, of mass and velocity. The humans were not playing the same game. They were the ones writing the rules of the universe in which the game was played. "And your soldiers," Vorlag pressed, his mind reeling. "We see no warriors, no infantry, no evidence of a military hierarchy. Who fights for you? Where is the army you command?" This was the heart of the matter, the title they had laughed at. The tiny army, what did it mean? Captain Ristova leaned forward slightly, her calm brown eyes locking onto his. "You are looking for soldiers, High Lord, but you are looking for the wrong thing. You assume a soldier is a physical being, an individual who wields a weapon. Your culture, your biology, your history have all conditioned you to see power as the domain of the individual warrior, magnified by technology. A Cathar warrior seeks personal glory in combat. That is a concept we abandoned long ago as logically inefficient and morally untenable." She gestured to the two silent humans who had accompanied her. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne, our lead theoretical physicist, and this is Alara Vance, our xenopsychologist and ethical strategist. They are part of my crew. They are what you would call my soldiers." Vorlag stared at the two unassuming humans. One was a wiry male with graying hair, the other a younger female with an intense analytical gaze. They were academics, scholars. "These are your warriors?" he asked, the words feeling absurd on his tongue. "They are," Ristova confirmed. "As is every member of this crew. You see, a human soldier is not a person. It is a state of being. When faced with a threat, the individual consciousness of every crew member aboard this fleet, every physicist, engineer, biologist, and philosopher unifies. We form a single Gestalt consciousness, a transient, networked intelligence, our minds augmented by the ship's quantum sea. Or become one strategic and tactical entity. Our bodies are simply biological terminals for a far greater mind." She let that statement sink in. The Cathar delegation was utterly still, their intimidating physical presence rendered meaningless by the sheer conceptual weight of her words. "What your fleet faced was not a ship commanded by a captain," Ristova continued, her voice soft but carrying an immense gravity. "It was a single, unified mind with thousands of cognitive nodes, capable of processing trillions of possibilities in the instant it took for your weapon to charge. The soldier that defeated your energy lance was a consensus-driven equation, formulated by the collective intellect of my entire crew. It was a thought, High Lord Vorlag, a pure logical thought that reshaped reality to ensure our survival. We do not need a large army because each of our minds is a weapon, and when unified, our fleet becomes a single, hyper-intelligent strategic entity. You laughed at our tiny army of ships, but you failed to realize that the soldiers were the minds inside them. And that army is larger, faster, and more powerful than any physical force you could ever assemble." The final reveal settled over the Cathar like a shroud. The silence in the room was absolute. They had come face to face with the true nature of human power, and it was not something that could be fought with warships and plasma cannons. It was a power of intellect, of unity, of a completely different evolutionary path. The humans had not evolved stronger bodies or sharper claws. They had evolved a way to transcend the individual to become something more. The Cathar Empire, with its billions of warriors and its countless fleets, had just been confronted by a handful of ships crewed by librarians and scientists, and had been found wanting. Vorlag finally understood the stillness he had felt when first observing the human fleet. It was the stillness of a mind at peace, a mind so vast and powerful it had no need for aggression or fear. It was the calm of absolute, unshakable confidence. He slowly lowered himself into a chair, the first time a Cathar High Lord had ever seated himself in the presence of an alien without first establishing dominance. In this room, he knew with chilling certainty, dominance was a meaningless concept. The journey back to the Obsidian Spire was a silent, contemplative affair. High Lord Vorlag did not speak, his mind consumed by the revelations aboard the Vigilance. The universe, which he had once seen as a vast but conquerable expanse, now felt infinitely more complex and mysterious. The Cathar Dominion, once the apex of galactic power in his eyes, now seemed like a blunt, primitive instrument, a relic of a bygone era of thought. When he reconvened the High Council, the atmosphere in the Grand Chamber was thick with a new kind of tension. The story of Jackral's failure had spread, but so too had whispers of the envoy's return. Cyan Kalen and his faction were primed for outrage, ready to condemn Vorlag for his cowardice and demand a war of extermination. Vorlag stood before them, not on the obsidian dais, but on the floor of the amphitheater, a symbol of humility that shocked the council into silence. He recounted his experience aboard the human ship. He did not embellish or interpret. He simply stated the facts as Captain Rostova had presented them. He spoke of a technology that could fold space. He spoke of a crew of scholars and scientists. And then he told them of the Gestalt consciousness, of the unified mind that was the true form of a human soldier. As he spoke, the arrogant smirks on the faces of Kalen's followers slowly vanished, replaced by looks of disbelief, then confusion, and finally, a dawning, horrified comprehension. The laughter that had once filled this chamber was now a ghost, a bitter memory of a profound and catastrophic misjudgment. "They possess a power we cannot match," Vorlag concluded, his voice echoing in the vast, silent hall. "Not because their ships are faster or their weapons stronger, but because their very method of existence is more advanced. They do not think as individuals in a crisis. They become a single, unified intelligence, a god mind in a machine shell. We sent a fleet to destroy them, and they analyzed our actions as a flaw in our logic. They possess the power to annihilate our entire armada, yet they chose to invite us to talk, to teach us." Cyan Kalen, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, finally found his voice. "Lies, it is a trick, a psychological ploy to make us fear them. They are soft-fleshed primitives. They bluffed, and you, High Lord, have fallen for it." Before Vorlag could respond, a new voice filled the chamber. It was calm, clear, and perfectly modulated, emanating from the chamber's own communication system. "There was no deception, Cyan Kalen." The great holographic display at the heart of the chamber flickered to life, showing the serene face of Captain Eva Rostova. Her sudden, uninvited presence sent a wave of shock through the assembled Cathar. They had not authorized this communication. She had simply opened a channel, bypassing the entirety of the Spire's legendary security systems as if they were not there. "Your systems are impressive," Rostova continued, her tone conversational, "but they are based on linear encryption protocols. Our consciousness is able to perceive the patterns and solve them intuitively. We are communicating with you now to prevent you from making a second, more catastrophic strategic error." Kalen was apoplectic, speechless with rage at this violation. But Vorlag held up a hand, demanding silence. He looked at the hologram of Rostova, a deep respect in his ancient eyes. "You said your purpose here was observation, Captain. What were you observing?" Rostova's calm expression grew somber. The starfield behind her on the Vigilance's bridge was replaced by a different kind of map. It was not a map of stars or galaxies, but of the immense dark void between the galaxies. It was a map of emptiness. "We were not observing you, High Lord, not initially. Your dominion was simply a significant political and military power on our route. We were tracking a signal, or rather an echo, a scar left on the fabric of spacetime." On the map, a faint, ghostly pattern began to resolve itself in the intergalactic void. It was a complex, repeating wave of exotic particle decay and dimensional stress. It was ancient, billions of years old, but it was unmistakably artificial. "Long ago," Rostova explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "our own galaxy was not alone. There were others closer, part of a local group that has since scattered due to cosmic expansion. But the scattering was accelerated. We found evidence in our deepest archives, fragments of data from precursor races of a great war. A war not between empires, but between realities. A war fought by beings who wielded concepts as weapons." She zoomed in on a section of the void, and the faint pattern became clearer. It looked like the ripple effect of something monstrously powerful having been thrown into the pond of reality. What you are looking at is the residual energy signature of a weapon that did not destroy planets or stars. It erased them from causality. It targeted a civilization's history and deleted it, leaving only this faint, terrible echo. A profound existential dread settled upon the grand chamber. The Cathar, a species that had defined itself by its ability to conquer and destroy, were being shown the work of a power that could unmake existence itself. Their greatest weapons were like children's toys compared to this. "We have tracked this echo across the void," Rostova said, "and we have found its source, or rather where its source used to be. A nearby dwarf galaxy, now little more than a loose collection of dead stars and rogue planets. But recently the echo has changed. It is no longer fading. It has begun to grow stronger. A new signal, infinitesimally faint, has begun to broadcast from the heart of that dead galaxy. It is not a communication. Our analysts believe it is a reactivation sequence." The implications of her words were staggering. The ancient, reality-altering weapon was not just a historical curiosity. It was powering up again. "Our mission here," Rostova stated, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the stunned Cathar Council, "was to observe this signal and assess its threat potential. Our assessment is now complete. The threat is absolute. It is not a threat to our species or to yours. It is a threat to all life, to all matter, to the fundamental laws of the universe." She looked directly at Vorlag, her expression no longer just calm, but imbued with a shared sense of gravity. "We did not come to your space as invaders, High Lord. We came as sentinels, and we have found what we feared we would find." The silence in the chamber was no longer one of pride or fear of a rival. It was a silence of profound, cosmic awe and terror. The petty squabbles over borders, the arrogance of empire, the laughter at a tiny fleet, it all evaporated in the face of this new, incomprehensible truth. Vorlag looked at the image of Rostova, then at the stunned faces of his council. He saw Cyan Kalen, his arrogance finally and completely shattered, his face pale with a fear he had never known. The humans had not come to fight them. They had come to warn them. Their tiny army was not an invasion force. It was a listening post, a canary in a cosmic coal mine. Vorlag slowly, majestically, ascended the steps to the obsidian dais. He stood not as a conqueror, but as the leader of a people who had just been awakened from a long and dangerous dream of their own supremacy. He looked at the hologram of the human captain, a being whose species he had dismissed hours ago, and saw not an alien, but an ally in a war he had not even known was Bane. "Waged, Captain Rostova," he said, his voice resonating with the full weight of his authority and newfound understanding. "You said our strategic analysis was flawed. You were correct. We have been preparing for the wrong war." He turned to his council, his gaze burning with a new fire. "We have prided ourselves on the size of our fleets, on the number of our soldiers. We have laughed at those who seemed small and weak. Today we have learned that true strength is not measured in numbers, but in intellect. In unity, and in the courage to face a truth that is larger than ourselves." He gestured to the holographic map of the void, to the terrible, silent signal pulsing in the darkness between galaxies. "That is our enemy, not the humans, not the lesser races we have so easily conquered, but a shadow from the beginning of time, an enemy that does not seek to conquer, but to erase." He looked back at Rostova, a silent understanding passing between the ancient Cathar warrior lord and the calm human scholar. The Dominion had spent centuries building an army to conquer the galaxy. Now they would have to learn to use it to defend reality itself. The tiny army of human minds had not come to start a war, but to recruit for a much larger one. And as the Cathar Empire, in stunned, silent unity, began to comprehend the true scale of the fight to come, the laughter was finally and forever forgotten.